Hey, welcome back to the show. Gary Holt and Rick Hunolt are absolute legends in the thrash world. I think they had the coolest tones ever and they were just so innovative with creating tones. But today I thought we'll be using the Marshall DSL 20H along with the Master Effects EQ from Hell and the Boss Super Overdrive SD1, and we'll just try and recreate that awesome tone from Fabulous Disaster that's absolutely crushing in your face. But let's just get on with it. When I think of awesome thrash guitar tones from the 80s, I can't really go too far past Exodus. I think Gary Holt and Rick Hunolt, they just had the coolest tones. They really forced the mids, but knew how to do it in a really crushing sort of way where you just force the mids in a certain bend and just really focus on that, and you just get this absolute modern sort of crushing tone. Working that with the Marshalls that they had. Gary Holt had his Langner modded Marshall. I've spoken about this before. He had 3 Marshall JCM 800s modded by Todd Langner in the Bay Area back in the 80s. And for some reason, these 3 Marshalls just came out totally unique from all the other mods that Todd Langner had even done. No other Marshalls just seemed to sound the same as the ones that he did for Gary Holt. And so many Exodus albums were recorded with these modded Marshalls, like Tempo the Damned, Impact is Imminent. They're absolutely crushing sounding albums. But we'll be using the Marshall DSL 20H today. Loads of you asked for this as requests just to dial in these tones, but this just has a massive top end. It's just so much gain on tap. But in all honesty, after having the other amps, if I was to compare it to the 800 or the VX Kraken, both of those amps to me, as Zach puts it, if you get a fine piece of meat and you chuck it on the barbecue, all you really have to do afterwards is just a little bit of salt and pepper and it's perfect. But with the Marshall DSL, there's some great tones to be had, but I find you've just got to work just that little bit more. You've got to use your EQs a little bit more accurately and just take time to dial things in. But all in all, there's some great features with the DSL. There's some awesome tones to be had. There's a reason I've made about 28 or 30 videos or something with it. But you can see the settings there, and this is just for the foundation for this tone. There's loads of bottom end on the Fabulous Disaster. There's loads of those lower mids, and there's a real sort of crunchy, aggressive high, but a lot of that comes through the EQ after. But for now, this is just the basic tone. I'll turn everything off over here. And that's a fairly brutal tone straight off the bat with that. The reverb's down to nothing, the gain's only at 50%. We're using the 2 notes... and we're using the 2 notes Torpedo Captor X today, just running through the standard 2 notes 412. It's Marshall 412 closed back Brit C cab, I think they call it. It's loaded with the vintage 30s and they're about 20% off the dust cap with an SM57, only the one microphone. You can see the settings there, but that's all we're doing to output the tone today. And then for the pedals we're using today, it starts with the Fort and Zool noise gate, and that's my guitar going straight in. We're using the key in, key through feature. So the key through feature then throws you around to the Ibanez Tube Screamer. We're not really using this pedal. I just put it on the board just to really compare with the Boss SD1. Gary Holt's always been a fan of the old Boss SD1, but I just thought we'd just put it there just to really just see the difference in the two. But they're the only pedals running through the front end of this. And then through the effects loop, we're using the Master Effects EQ from Hell, and that then is going into the Fort and Zool noise gate, which is going out into the MXR carbon copy and then back into the FX return on the DSL. So hopefully you have all that. It's fairly straightforward. It's fairly simple when you get used to it, but it all relies on the Fort and Zool noise gate to really route everything through the effects loop and through the front end. So the reason that I use overdrives in a tone like this, it's already fairly distorted in the front. You want to focus that distortion a little bit. You want to tighten things up just so you can really lay into that crunch. You can build a lot of the bass and push those mids afterwards using an EQ in the loop. But to start with, you really just want to focus things and get that crunchier attack. So we've got the SD1. It's set a little bit different to usual, but this is the basic tone. And if we add the EQ from Hell to that, you can see that I'm pushing the bass a little bit. These top ones are the actual gains for each of the bands, so your bass, middle and treble. And essentially we're pushing the bass, we're just pushing the mids. It looks like we're backing off the treble, but we're actually backing off some of those higher mids. But anyway, this is it turned on. We'll talk about it more in a tick. that's why I just love EQ so much, especially working with the DSL. You can just really focus things and get the coolest tones out of it. So just to explain what's going on here, and this is why Rick Hunolt and Gary Holt's tone is just so cool for these albums, 1989, but they worked out that if you just force these lower mids, I'm pushing the mids, but you can see it's turned right back for the bandwidth, and I'd say this is more of like a, I don't know, 600 to 800 hertz. It's not really pushing around the 1.2 or anything like that. We're really just pushing those lower mids as well as pushing the bass, and that way you just get this really punchy lower mid sort of sound. It works perfect with the DSL. But then with the treble, this is actually a huge player into getting that top end on this tone, just to get it sitting exactly right. It works with the mids as well. We've brought the treble gain down, but we've brought the frequency right into those higher mids, and the bandwidth have just made a really narrow little band that's just sitting in a perfect spot. I don't even know where this is. And I guess that's the beauty with the parametric EQ. You just tend to use your ears a lot more. You don't use your eyes like you do with a graphic EQ. You're not sure of the exact bands and things that you're cutting or you're boosting, but I just find every time I'm dialing a tone with Gary Holt, the whole EQ at the end, most of the time it just tends to look like this. But I'll try and explain it through tone. We'll just play some riffs. I'll move the EQ slightly and we'll just see the difference in the tone that makes. But the first thing I'll show is just how important it is just to really push those lower mids to get this style of tone. Like and you can hear it's fairly forgiving there. You've really got a great range, just pretty much from straight up all the way back just to there. You've got a great range just to really focus those mids. And if we move from there to the treble band, you'll just see that the actual Q dial working on the width of the waveform, how much that actually changes the tone if we have it from being a really narrow band to really widen it, and just how much that sort of eats into the mids and we lose some of that top end. And hopefully you can pick up on some of those tonal changes there as we're riffing the toxic waltz. But you can hear how powerful the EQ from hell is within the effects loop, especially with the Marshall DSL. To me, this is my favorite of all the parametric EQs that I have. It's just a really simple style EQ. It's easy to operate, but it's super transparent and every dial just seems to work really well. There's great balance to be had with it. When all the dials are all at 12 o'clock, it's totally transparent, won't affect your tone. And that way you can just tweak and just add a little bit of bass if you need, or scoop a little bit of mids, or work the whole thing and just create some really cool tones. But the EQ from hell absolutely kicks ass. I'll have links in the description for Master Effects for that, but it's just a super cool EQ. One thing I'll just talk about quickly are the two different overdrives that I've got in the front end of this amp. And when I set up these tones, I'm not exactly sure which one is going to sound better, which one's going to sound closer to the record. This is the difference between the two. It's very minor. So the difference between the two overdrives, it really is just a subtle difference, especially with this sort of tone that's so saturated in other ways. But to me, the Albanese Tube Screamers are just a little bit smoother, whereas the SD1 is just grittier and it's crunchier. It is nasty. It does suit this tone, but there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed today's show. The Marshall DSL still is loads of fun. There's unreal tones to be had. You do have to work a little bit hard just to get the tones exactly right, but in a way, that's a really good thing, because I think you just get a little bit lazy with like a JSM 800 and amps like that and the VX Kraken. The tones are just so cool straight out of the box that you don't need to do any tweaking. You don't need to learn your EQs as much. But the DSL, all the tones are in there. Everything's really cool once you unlock it. But thanks so much to Gary Holt and Rick Hunolt for being absolute innovators, just coming up with these tones to start with. And we get to sit here 40 years later and just sort of dissect them and work it out and talk about it. And I think it's absolutely cool. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye.